Yeah, I think like it's become fashionable to write love letters to Sam Altman in the tech
Everyone's
industry.
fighting for the love letter.
Maybe our next pod should be just a poem to Sam. I have two Gen Alphas as kids. They are growing up learning how to talk to a computer, rather than sort of look for one like we did as Gen X's.
Yeah, maybe Aman, I can just figure out, maybe just replace you as my co-host and have a Gen AI out there. But
Dude,
anyway,
like
we're
this
off
is
track.
this is a bit early for a power play, Zubin. Bit early in the
Bold
relationship.
moves, bold moves. That's all we're talking about.
I prefer option one.
Well, I mean, I think the thin side is that AI is, you really need, like, I guess, the jumbo jet to win, not the Concorde. And it's not about having the fastest or the smartest models. And the winner is the one who achieves mass scale, not the one who achieves Mach 2.
Welcome back to A to Z, where we decode the biggest shifts in finance, tech, payments, and everything in between. I'm Aman.
And I'm Zubin. On today's show, we're bringing back a classic format where we're dissecting the biggest stories of the week. Then we do a deep dive into Apple's high-stakes AI gamble at WWDC.
And finally, we unpack the return of a tech oracle. After 6 years of silence, Mary Meeker is back with a 340-page sermon on AI, and we have all the takeaways.
But a quick heads up before we dive in, our views are our own, not those of any organizations that we're linked with. This is just two dudes riffing. It's not financial advice. It's deep dives into ideas that we believe that are shaping the world. So with that, let's get into it.
Zubin, when we were growing up in India, there was an iconic show by Prannoy Roy called The World This Week. It was a definitive summary of everything that mattered. In that spirit, I thought we could bring our top 3 stories shaping the landscape right now.
Love that. And kicking it off, I think the first big story is the Fintech IPO winter is finally thawing. We saw that with neobank giant Chime debut at the NASDAQ on the 12th of June and surge almost 37% on its first day itself. And then that was right after stablecoin issuer Circle also successfully IPO'd in the New York Stock Exchange. And this just isn't just a blimp. It almost feels like the floodgates are reopening for proven fintech innovators.
Absolutely. It's a huge confidence boost for the entire sector, essentially. And speaking of confidence, story number 2 is Stripe's strategic crypto play. They just acquired the crypto wallet startup Privy. This isn't just bolting on a feature. It's Stripe laying down the foundation plumbing for essentially decentralization's future. And even if that was not enough, they followed up the next day with Coinbase, a partnership to enable the USDC stablecoin payments for Shopify. And
Insane.
again, as a reminder, this follows the 1.1 billion acquisition of Bridge that we covered in our first episode. Stripe is really positioning themselves to be the core infrastructure of the next wave of Web3 commerce.
And for those listening to us for the first time, I'd highly recommend going back and listening to our first episode where we break up a bit about Stripe's master plan about taking on the financial infrastructure of the internet, which brings us to our final story. And this really is a move that transcends fintech, but I think we believe, and as we were talking about this, will ultimately define it, which is Meta just made this mammoth 14-point play for a 49% stake in Scale AI. And this just isn't about Instagram filters. It's about really owning that infrastructure for the super intelligence. And if you think about what they're doing with the AGI labs, they're really developing AI systems that surpass human level intelligence, right? They've also brought in Scale AI's CEO, Alexander Wang, to lead the new AGI group. And Aman, this isn't just some sci-fi future. This is like the convergence of AI and data infrastructure. And if we translate that back into the fintech world, this is really ultimately going to power anything from sort of hyper-personalized banking to hopefully entire new financial products.
Zubin, I don't know if you saw. I'll throw up a meme on here. I think Sam Altman paid what half of this to get Johnny Ive, and now Zuck is paying twice as much for Alex Wang. I think it almost deserves its own love photo, which I'll throw up there for a second.
Right there. Yeah. Love it, love it, love it, love it.
Listen, I think that was a perfect summary, if we may say so ourselves. 3 stories that show that the market is really rewarding real innovation and really focusing on strategic expansion and deep tech plays. But Zubin was once a company that made huge waves this week. And in the words of its founder, Steve Jobs, I think we have one more thing.
That's exactly. And that's Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, or what normally is called WWDC. And, I remember I used to eagerly wait to attempt to watch some of the early shows that Steve Jobs used to run, and where he would come onto stage and conjure up this magic.
Yeah.
And I remember there was time where I think it was like, probably 10 or 12 years ago, where he even got Bono and U2 to close out the show.
I remember that.
And I hate to admit it, but I almost feel like those days are gone. And please don't get me wrong. Like, I think Tim Cook has done a fabulous job, right? He's an incredible steward for shareholders. He's more than tripled their revenue, and I believe close to 6x the company's value since taking over. And I actually, to give Tim Cook full credit, like from a production and a distribution machine, Apple is stronger than ever. But I feel that machine may have lost its heart.
Zubin, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. To me, it comes down to 2 things. I think first, Apple lost its hardware-software balance. It has over the last decade or so. It was always heavy-footed on hardware, but the OS, was its soul. I think under Craig, Craig Federighi, look, honestly, I think he makes better keynotes than he pushes the OS. I think the software has lagged. I don't know if you remember Scott Forstall. He was like a force of nature. And sure, he fell on his sword for Apple Maps, but that was the kind of ambition that made the OS magical. And now it feels, I guess, safe.
Safe is that right word. And kind of leads you to that second sort of bigger issues. And I feel like they've completely missed the boat on AI. And it's baffling, right? Like, you and I were at Google when it was a huge thing when they hired Google's AI legend, John Giandreas. I'm probably butchering his name.
This is an edition where we're going to butcher everybody's names.
in 2018. But he's largely been invisible over these last 7 or 8 years. Yeah. And there's this over-reliance on OpenAI, which in a weird way seems to be much more than even Microsoft. And it almost like you kind of go back to those early days when we were at Google, and like actually probably right before we joined Google, and like the early days of Android. What's stopping someone like OpenAI, and we saw their partnership with Johnny Ives really coming together, launching their own hardware and sort of almost creating that Android moment. And kind of, again, going back to that history lane, it was around the time that, I think Eric Schmitz left Apple's board, and around changed that sort of trajectory growth that we saw with Android as it relates to that. So there's this open close. Again, I almost feel like Apple's missed the boat on AI.
Yeah, and I think that's the existential threat for Apple. I think their relentless focus on privacy, which is admirable, is sort of, from reporting and talking to, friends who are there, making it incredibly difficult to partner and even more so build for AI in a sort of forward-thinking way. So I guess the big question is, what does Apple do now? And Zubin, I see 2 paths forward.
Lay them out, Aman.
So, okay, ready for this? Path 1 is a well-trodden path. I think, as controversial as this is, I think Apple needs to fall back in love with Google. They should do a deal on AI that's as deep and strategic as their search deal. Go ahead, keep the OpenAI partnership as an option to keep regulators happy. But the core integration, the heart of this machine that you referred to, should be with Google. Combine Apple's superpower in building hardware that people love and ecosystems that lock in everybody, and combine that with Google's unparalleled AI and software genius. I think that's the path to the next trillion in market cap for both of those companies.
Very logical and pragmatic path. Well, what's the alternative, Aman?
I was hoping you'd ask me that. The alternative is a bold new path, right? I think Apple goes on a acqui-hiring spree, just like we saw with Meta, and you just talked about Meta and Scale AI. Forget partnerships, buy Perplexity. In parallel, go hire Mira Murati and Ilya Stutzkever. Almost got that right. And reunite the sort of the old OpenAI team and get them to build the proprietary LLM with Perplexity as the sort of beautiful, intuitive wrapper on top of it. And then go ahead and kill the tired Safari brand and relaunch it as, let's say, Safari AI. Just properly go on the offensive with the massive cash that they have in the bank right now.
Love it, love it, love it. And I think what you highlight, Aman, is either way they have to do something big. Because this isn't just about Siri getting smarter. It's about solving this epic fail that they have. And I mean, take Vision Pro as an example, right? Like I think last year was all about sort of augmented reality and sort of the metaverse, if I could use that word. Even like I would actually argue, we talked about this at Google's the Android sort of glasses. I freaking love them. Like
you try them on
so much. I actually did try them on, and I have a picture that I'm not allowed to share on social until it comes out. But it's in trial mode.
You're such an influencer, Zubin. You're such an influencer.
Fantastic. But I think they need to launch something like that. The AR glasses, potentially even powered by some sort of killer AI, maybe even just Google, right? Like you just talked about this. And they got to do it before, if you look at what OpenAI and Sam and Johnny Ives are doing, like they got to beat them to this and define the next computing platform. And
by the way, did you get to check the maps feature out where you can look at the map and then you look down and you see the map? Did you see that?
That's on your phone. Yeah, that's on your phone. This augmented reality has been there, but imagine that.
No, but with your glasses on, apparently
right.
When you look down, you can see the map, but when you look up, you see directions.
See the world. Yeah, totally. And the clock's ticking for Apple, so they got to act. They got to do something big, something bold.
Yeah, Zubin, we talked about this with respect to, Sundar, or I forget whether we talked about it or I posted about it, saying, how he's gone into wartime mode from a peacetime CEO. I think that's kind of what Tim Cook, again, from where they sit on the highest pedestal of all, he needs to make that transition. Speaking of transitions, let's talk a little bit about Mary Meeker and defining the next platform. Look, Mary Meeker is a true icon for those of you who are, followed her reports from when she was very prolific over 6 years ago. She used to release this Internet Trends report, which the last one, amazingly, I was just looking this up, was released in 2019. But she's back, and she dropped a 340-page deep dive. That took us and AI a little bit of time to go through. It's not just a report; it's like a thesis on the future of civilization. Forget tech. And we, Zubin, you and I distilled that into 5 takeaways. So you want to take the first one?
Yeah, let's do that. The first one's impossible to miss, right? Like her deck is almost this love letter to Sam Altman and ChatGPT. And if you look at their sort of growth in 17 months, ChatGPT has hit about 800 million weekly users and 4 billion in revenue. That's just insane. And that's not a growth curve. That's a vertical ball. And, if you look at sort of comparables, like, the sweethearts of the web 2.0, like take even Netflix, like 10 years user scale, these guys have achieved in about 2 months. And this is just the first general AI product with, true mass consumer appeal. So there's no longer a question of, will people use AI? But it's like, can anyone possibly catch up? I think that's the big point, the first point that we wanted to kind of highlight.
Yeah, I think like it's become fashionable to write love letters to Sam Altman in the tech industry.
Everyone's fighting for the
maybe our next pod should be just a poem to Sam. Look, I think this hyperscaling is just mind bending, and it kind of leads to the second point we wanted to make, she did make, which is that we're moving from tap to talk, right? The human interface is fundamentally changing. From the days of where Apple and Steve Jobs introduced touch, now it's moving to talk. And I think the Turing test is basically obsolete. I think there was a recent study that showed that 73% of people now mistake AI for a human in the conversation. Companies like 11 Labs are cloning voices. We should probably do that
Pretty
as well.
impressive.
For Spotify and ChatGPT 4.5 and really enabling seamless multimodal conversations. The interface itself is now the product. And we're not just using new tools, we are conversing them. I have two Gen Alphas as kids. They are growing up learning how to talk to a computer, rather than sort of look for one like we did as Gen X's.
Yeah, maybe Aman, I can just figure out, maybe just replace you as my co-host and have a Gen AI out there. But
Dude,
anyway,
like
we're off track.
this is a bit early for a power play, Zubin. Bit early in the
Bold
relationship.
moves. That's all we're talking about.
I prefer option one.
Well, I mean, I think the third insight is that AI is, you really need, like, I guess, the jumbo jet to win, not the Concorde. And it's not about having the fastest or the smartest models. It's about who carries the most people, right? And if you look at like sort of training costs, they're just exploding. Anthropic, as an example, like next model might cost them close to about 10 billion to build, but the cost per interface is plummeting.
Yeah.
And it's a classic problem play, right? High fixed costs, low marginal costs. And the winner is the one who achieves mass scale, not the one who achieves Mach 2.
Yeah. I think this is why everyone is racing to build a platform, right? This sort of brings us essentially to our fourth point, which is a little bit more involved. Like essentially, Mary Meeker lays out a 4-layer stack for AI dominance. I'll just refer to my notes here. I think the ecosystem is crystallizing. At the bottom of this, you have the cloud compute layer. You've got Amazon, Google, Microsoft on that. Above that, you've got infrastructure and chips. You've got NVIDIA, you've got OpenAI and Meta. And then you have the models, as you said, the Anthropics, the Mistrals, DeepSeeks. And then finally, at the super top, you've got the application or the UX layer, Perplexity, U.com. Mary Meeker's point, if you don't know where you sit in the stack, you're probably going to be somebody else's margin.
Brutal but brilliant sort of framing. And it all culminates to this fifth and sort of final point. And there's a new AI arms race, and I think the infrastructure is the new oil. This isn't just commercial competition, it's almost geopolitical, right? Like we're seeing that sort of play out. The US tech sector from a CapEx perspective, and sorry, I'm going to read my notes as well on this because I feel like I'm struggling with some of these numbers right now. Hit 212 billion, which is a 63% year-over-year jump, almost entirely driven by AI. Let's put that in perspective. The tech sector CapEx hit was 212 billion, a 63% year-over-year jump, which is insane when you think about it, the scale that this is happening. And then NVIDIA's ecosystem is 6 million developers. China's LLMs already control about 20% of the global's desktop share. So leadership in AI will soon define national power. And again, I don't want to make this a political sort of mandate, but it's no longer an option. It's almost like this is your mandate for survival and relevance into the next.
A powerful and sober conclusion. Well, that's all the trouble we're causing for one day.
Let's recap this. We spotted 3 promising signs that the great fintech freeze is finally over. We dished out some, frankly, unsolicited, and I would argue brilliant advice for Apple's AI strategy. And maybe, Aman, we need to forward that sort of consulting invoice to Cupertino. And then to top it off, we wrestled with Mary Meeker's latest epic report so that you won't have to. The key takeaway, the ground is shifting under tech and finance. Try to keep up.
We hope you found this discussion insightful. If you did, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform, share this episode with a friend, and let us know your take. Does Apple need Google, or should they go on this bold new path we talked about? We'd love to hear from you.
You know what? Until next time, please follow us on A to Z, or as I like to say, A to Z.